Howdy folks, I'm Tyler Henderson. Thanks so much for joining us on East Texas in Focus. Let's go ahead and get started. Tonight we're focusing on Longview as part of our new series on city managers all across East Texas, discussing the role of these leaders, how they serve the people, and what they do for their cities on a daily basis to ensure they operate for everyone's best interest. That's why we're bringing in Longview City Manager Rolin McPhee. Rolin, thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time out to join us.
Thank you for having me, Tyler.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the priorities for Longview in 2025, their plans for future development. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And let's go ahead and start for get a basic understanding of what a city manager is, what a city manager does. So what is the role of a city manager?
So thanks for the question. A lot of people don't know. They'll ask, what do you do as city manager? They're not really sure. It's kind of a nebulous title, if you will. But actually, it's the head of the administration and operations of the city. But when I explain that to folks, what I try and tell people is that being a city manager is very similar to being a CEO of a company. So if you think about the citizens of a community being the shareholders that elect a board of directors, which would be the mayor and city council, and then the mayor and city council acting as the board decide and appoint a city manager to oversee the daily operations and maintenance of that administrative functions during the day.
Brian, so that kind of flows into that next question we have. In the structure of a city, you have your mayor, you have your city council. The city manager sits where in that pecking order?
So basically, I work for 7 different people. I work for the mayor and 6 council members that are elected at large in different areas representative of the city of Longview. My direct report liaison is to the mayor daily, but I actually have 7 people that I work for, and all of those 7 people actually work for the over 80,000 people in the community.
Right, and if you're working for 7 different people, you're getting tugged each which way, needing you for whatever on whatever day. So what are some of your responsibilities as the city manager there of Longview?
So as the city manager, probably the largest responsibility is to be mindful of the budget, is to propose a budget to council. It is the single largest action item that we do on an annual basis, and that comes with lots of different competing interests. I have a different perspective, or at least I believe it to be different, that I believe city managers' jobs are actually supposed to make the departments within the city successful and make sure they have the resources needed to do their job in spite of limitations. And so when you think of board of directors or a company that has shareholders, typically companies do 1 or 2 things really well, but municipalities do public safety, they do EMS, they do streets and drainage maintenance, they produce water, they take care of the sewers, they provide recreations and parks departments. And so many of those things are competing interests and competing dollar amounts. And so there's not just one thing that cities have to do well. They have to do a number of different things well. And I believe the role of the city manager is to make sure people have the resources to do what the citizens expect delivered to them day in and day out.
Right, and so now you talk about your bosses, your mayor, your city councilmen. Those are elected positions. And so when it comes to getting into the role of city manager, it's a little different story. So how did you get into the seat that you're in now?
So I had my formal education as an engineer. So if you had asked me back in 1991 when I got out of school at Texas A&M, they would say, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to work with water and sewer lines. I did that for a long time. I entered the municipal field after about a year's worth of experience in engineering. Came to the city of Longview after I got my professional engineering license, worked here for 5 months, and went and became the city engineer for the city of Marshall. Worked in Marshall for a number of years. Longview hired me back in December of 2000, and I worked my way up in a number of different positions through utilities engineer, through engineering manager, through assistant director of public works, and then ultimately the director of public works, and then council actually considered my appointment as a council and installed me in January of 22. So I'm on my 25th year here.
All right, so when you spend that much time in any one place, you kind of get to see everything. And when people look at y'all's titles, look at your position, they may assume that the city takes care of some things, that the city's not really responsible of. So what are some of the things that people might think the city takes charge of but aren't?
So a lot of times cities have a role to play in nearly every other business that's located within the community, but we don't necessarily have a role. SWEPCO is our electric provider. We have very limited authority in that. We have very little authority in gas delivery systems and distribution systems to home. We have some, but ultimately that's driven by the PUC. We have partners that we work with in the healthcare industry, but we're not linked to the hospitals. We serve as liaison and actually are contracted with to provide school resource officers by some of the school districts. But really, the things that maybe people think, well, that's just Longview. We have relationships with some of those things. We have relationships with people who invest in our community, but we don't dictate where they invest and we don't dictate the policies of those respective organizations.
Let's look at the flip side of that coin. So what are some things that the city actually takes care of that most people may not know about?
So I think a lot of things that we do, ultimately, we are taken for granted because municipalities do a terrible job, and that's partly on my responsibility. We do a terrible job talking about the things we do. Since Longview's over 50,000 population, we take care of all the rights of way, state rights of way, public properties, parks properties, all the mowing, all of that people see. We have a role in litter pickup that we contribute. The water and sewer that's delivered to your home, everybody thinks that's just the water bill. That's actually water, sewer, and sanitation. It's a part of the city, but they're separate entities. And so timing of traffic signals in Longview, that's something we're responsible for. We're responsible for housing. We provide housing through our Housing and Community Services group. That group actually handles housing for different communities in our region. We are information services, the backbone of everything that the city does for supporting all the different departments. We actually furnish some of those services to sister cities that have contracted with us for that. So it's just a large footprint.
Well, you've been doing this for a couple years now as far as the position that you're in, and obviously going through Longview has got a lot to get excited about. So what are some of your favorite things about being the city manager there in Longview?
So for me, the passion truly is making sure that employees within our city, those employees actually have additional training that they are invested upon so that we can deliver our services better. I think we've tried to, for a number of years, we've tried to encourage development of our existing employees to further their education. We provide additional training. We provide customer service training to help deliver that service to the customer. Because at the end of the day, when people have interactions with the city staff and the city employees, I want them to say, that went fantastically. But those are the ones you don't hear about as often, right? You hear about the ones that went wrong.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to start. So when we return with East Texas in Focus, we'll have more with Longview's Rolin McPhee, and we'll have more in-depth topics for city managers and the questions that you have for them. So we'll be back. Welcome back, y'all. We're focusing on city managers in East Texas to better understand the extent, though, of what those roles entail, such as what these leaders do on a daily basis to serve their community and contribute to future development. We're learning more about Longview City Manager Rolin McPhee and his 20-plus years of experience there in city operations. It's Longview City Manager Rolin McPhee. He is still with us. So, Rolin, let's get right back into it. We've been talking about the legislative session that's going on down in Austin, and anything that happens in Austin, we need to be paying attention to because it trickles down and impacts us here locally. So, the big question I have, so how much of an effect does what's going on in Austin during these legislative sessions have on what y'all are doing in Longview?
For the past few years, it's unfortunate, but it's had a tremendous impact on municipal operations. It has limited the ability of cities to navigate increased costs, restrictions on revenues. It really, the municipalities and cities have what I'd call a love-hate relationship with one another. a lot of times they don't like what some cities are doing, and so they put restrictions. But a lot of times when they put those restrictions, they have real effects for the local decisions and what the local community has decided to do. So if, for an example, just this year compared to last year, our proposed budget was reduced by $500,000.
Wow.
And that's an extremely difficult thing to do in light of the ongoing costs and inflationary pressures that everyone at home has had. They're happening with cities too. The problem is there is a stigma associated with cities because when people say taxes, they don't like that word, but it actually funds a large portion of what we do.
Right. Now, we were talking a little bit earlier. You keep a pretty close eye on what's happening down in Austin. So tell us a little bit about your background there and what specifically you're looking at from this legislative session.
So there are a number of bills being filed right now that are relevant to cities. As part of that effort to stay informed, cities participate with a group called Texas Municipal League, and it's a group of cities that actually have a group to keep us informed on decisions that are happening in Austin and keep us abreast of those situations. So we have a Thursday morning briefing call every morning at 9 a.m. as part of the Texas City Managers Association Advocacy Committee, and that is to make sure that our local voices are heard in Austin. There have been a number of restrictions in the past that I would say was basically community censorship. They've talked about not wanting to hear those conversations, not because of necessarily our cities or our local cities, but because of other cities that have changed that. The problems they are proposing right now or talking about doing is further limitations on revenue. I just mentioned to you that our budget this year was less than it was last year. I don't think anyone's had a budget for their current year that's less than last year. One of the main reasons due to that is the restrictions that they placed on property tax revenues. They've restricted it to 3.5%. They're also thinking about restricting that down to 0%, which means cities would be largely dependent on sales tax alone, which is the one thing that cities don't have complete control over, the state of the economy.
Right. And it sounds a lot of negative. A lot of negative things have happened recently. And so talk to us a little bit about that, the negative impact that, obviously that's just one example, but maybe a couple more things that you can think of that has negatively impacted what you do in the city.
So one of the things that municipalities have had experienced the same 9% growth in inflation over the last 2 years. Obviously, we've had to reduce programs. We've had to pull back from things we've done. We've had to consider reducing mowing cycles to where grass gets taller along the roads and right-of-ways that could make it unsafe. We've actually had to curtail additional programs, and we fought a lot of vacancies. It's tough to find people right now. Municipalities historically pay below the going wage just because of the benefit package that they offer. However, we've had 10% vacancy rates over the last couple of years in several of our larger departments, including police, fire, and public works. And when you have those type of vacancies, you can't accomplish the work or the level of work that's expected. And as people continue to invest in projects or new parks, or the community wants new things, it becomes a further strain because you don't have the funds to maintain those things.
Right, and it goes back to this domino effect. When a domino falls whichever way, good or bad, down in Austin, that trickle effect is going to happen. It comes to our cities, and then it comes to the people that live, work, have their businesses in cities like Longview. So how does all of that impact the residents, the business owners, the people that just want to do life in Longview, but when you have something, one of those dominoes fall, maybe the wrong way, or hopefully the right way in Austin, how does it impact the people that are just doing life in Longview?
So I like to think about this. The city of Longview has invested, and this community has invested in reinvestment to their infrastructure. They've reinvestment to their park systems, reinvestment to their facilities. If you continue to have this restriction on revenues, what's going to happen is those things aren't going to be maintained in accordance with what the voters expected to be done. So if you think about that, I kind of, the easiest way to translate that is when you buy a new car, you may buy a new car every 5 years. When you buy a new car, if you don't have the money to change the oil, it's going to last a lot less than what you think it's going to, because you don't have the funds to devote to it. So you limp along, and as one of the city managers in our association has said, we've done an incredible job of managing those things and trying to cover those things to where people don't perceive that. But this has been a recurring message for me the last 2 legislative sessions, that there is an end in sight coming to where it will go the other way. It won't be what things do we want to do additionally for our citizens or what to be. It'll be which services do we want to discontinue. And that becomes a very difficult situation where you talk about draconian cuts, where you're lopping off things that are essential services to those that need that.
And so from your perspective, is there a solution to stopping some of that negative fallback from Austin? And if you think there is, what is that solution?
I really believe that a lot of times, and it's because the federal elections become such a focal point, our communities pay a lot of attention to our federal elections, but the people that impact your life daily are your municipalities that you live in. Those are the people that provide the things when you go to your faucet and you turn on the water. That's the municipal groups. That's your community. And I do think the people that they want to hear from are the people that put them in office. They want for the community to be involved. I believe advocacy, whatever your position on the legislative priorities are, being involved and paying attention to state and local legislatures' actions has a tremendous effect on the community in which you live.
Well, let's go ahead and try and hit some of the hot topics that are going on down in Austin right now. I'm glad you touched, I think unintentionally, on water there. Water conservation across the state of Texas has been an issue, especially the last few months. It's been right at the forefront of things. So does the city have any concerns with y'all's water systems, first and foremost? And if you could just dive into that a little bit for me.
Certainly. As I told you, I had been in public works for a very long time. Utilities was where I mentioned that early on, that's something I wanted to spend a lot of my career doing. Actually, Longview has had a continued reinvestment within the infrastructure over the last 20 years. In fact, when they brought me back in 2000, we were building a new plant and securing water rights. And actually, based on our current growth, if you look out 50 years, which is what the regional water planning groups plan for, Longview actually has enough water for the next 50 years and the capabilities to provide that to our community and its potential growth. So Longview's in a really fortunate position. Long architect before me, I was not the one that should get the credit for it, but there was a lot of action put towards reinvestment in that infrastructure. And actually the city of Longview's utility system is actually in fantastic shape and real close to retiring its debt. So in a great position for the long term for the next 50 years.
There's a lot of good stuff coming out of Longview, and I think that's a good spot to stop for now. But when we return, we're going to get your thoughts. We're going to open up the In Focus inbox after the break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Welcome back, y'all. It's that time of the show that we hear from you, our viewers, in our In Focus inbox. So let's go ahead and get right into it. This one is sent in by Connie M. saying, are we ever going to have recycled trash separate for disposal again?
It's a great question. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an answer. So if you'll remember, there was a large fire at the major recycling facility, Rivers Recycling, that consumed the facility as well as its equipment. They're actually working on coming up with a plan to start that process again, get the new equipment installed that's more state-of-the-art. There's also a separate company that has opened up a new recycling facility that we're actually talking to now. So we are actively working towards getting that back for our residents. It is every intention of doing that, because ultimately recycling is that's what keeps us progressing in that sense.
Absolutely. Now, I want to give a shout out to the people of Longview. They are very curious. When we sent out the question, hundreds of responses. So they really want to know what's happening in the city. One of those, streets. Carmen J is saying, this is what my streets look like. Many streets around the city, they look like this or similar to it. So who fixes them, and what is the city doing to alleviate the issue of the roads there?
Well, that's a great question too. So we are limited to the number of eyes we have, right, as city employees. We have only so many employees that see that in targeted work. We have a City Send app that we encourage people to take pictures of that, submit it. We will schedule that repair. It's not uncommon for during the winter months, when the asphalt plants close down, we've had some really bad temperatures. We've had some heavy freeze-thaw cycles. That's actually when the roads shrink and expand, water gets held in them. They actually have a bigger problem at that particular time. So we actually, the winter time is a very difficult time because the temperature has to be just right to do the asphalt repair. So a lot of what we do in the December, January, and give or take a month on either side is just keeping the streets serviceable without potholes. Now, street funding, that's one of those things that when my initial budget prepared, the only way I could figure out how to close that gap was to cut street funding. And just like you noticed, nobody wanted to cut street funding. But that's a real concern for the future. If some of the constraints we talked about, we won't even be able to do the job that we've been doing with that constraint. So we do look at our streets once every 3 years. We have a third-party contractor. We have a pavement management system that selects the streets and what they need for their rehab or for their maintenance, and then we bid that work, and the work that's beyond maintenance, we schedule that as appropriate for large dig out and patch operations. But I'd encourage anyone with these type of concerns to submit those on City Send, because we do address those comments as they come in.
Rolin, thank you, and hopefully that answered some of your questions. And as always, we invite you for more feedback to focus on. We want your voice to be heard next week, so send us an email at infocus@ketk.com, and you might see your comments right here on the big show. But coming up after the break, we have some closing words from me and our Longview City Manager, Rolin McPhee, after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. Rolin, let's get some final thoughts on how the city of Longview is doing and how it's going to be doing here in the near future.
Well, I think the city's got a lot of great things looking forward to. It's spring. That's a real active time of year for us. We have lots of events and lots of this Arboretum is celebrating its 10th year of the music series. We have Downtown Live that comes back. We also are getting real excited about the new Eastman expansion that's going to bring over $1 billion worth of reinvestment and molecular recycling to our area. So recycling is really important to us, especially in light of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank y'all. Next week, we're going to zero in on more issues here in East Texas, all happening this coming Saturday on East Texas in Focus after Fox 51 News at 9. Good night, everybody.